Hey, here we are on a Mormon Truth video. This is going to be about how to know that Mormonism is not a cult, like those Christians like to say, but that our plan of eternal progression is totally awesome, even if it does seem to have some Masonic and mystery religion roots. So, who's this? Why is Lizzy waving to us? This is Lizzy B. She was in the Jehovahs Witnesses organization for a number of years, and she's done some rather interesting videos. She's a really smart lady, and she saw how cult mind control was used with the Jehovah's Witnesses. So we can really use what she's got to say to compare ourselves and see that we're not stuck in a false religion like she was with the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. Now, you know, as a Mormon, you're probably hearing things from Christians that are always sounding outlandish, like, you believe that Jesus and Lucifer were brothers, so you're idiots. You're all in cults. JW is a cult, SDA, Mormons, they're all cults. Well, when we think of cult, the dictionary's got multiple cult definitions, and basically most of them encompass all religion. The Christians just don't like that. But, the really loaded term comes in when we start talking about, James Jonestown or Heaven's Gate, that kind of a thing, David Koresh, Charles Manson. And so Mormonism is something we can really define. People are so mainstream in Mormonism, it couldn't possibly be involved with this because mainstream people aren't manipulated through cult mind control, are they? We're going to use some specific things that I think are going to be helpful. And we'll talk a little bit about the bite model and so forth. And Lizzy brings out some really great things in some of her videos, and you probably ought to go watch her because her experience with the JWs is pretty eye-opening, especially for Mormons who aren't used to some of these ideas. And you can see how lucky you are that you weren't stuck with the stuck in the Watchtower's organization, because they do use some really manipulative practices in their religion. So how does this happen? We're not like, Heaven's Gate. We're not drinking the Kool-Aid with Jim Jones in in Guyana. We're not doing the phenobarbital and vodka in Rancho Santa Fe with Applewhite, and trying to get on a spaceship by committing suicide. Of course, some of those folks maybe in Guyana, they were inside, fences, and maybe there were guys with machine guns out there, and they were told they were just keeping the bad guys out, the sinners, the bad guys. But when they wanted to leave, were they able to leave? Well, like I said, this doesn't seem to apply to Mormonism, so why are all these ridiculous Christians giving us this kind of trash? Let's see what Lizzy teaches us about what happened in the JW's organization and see if any of that looks like something that we recognize, or can we just clear Mormonism once and for all? Why don't we just clear the air here? Mormonism is not cult-like at all, right? Okay, what is the bite model? Well, Steve Hassan was a guy who wrote a book having to do with cult mind control practices and recognizing when you are in a high control organization. He actually had experience with being in the Moonies, and oddly enough, as an intelligent guy, he didn't realize that he was in a cult organization. He didn't realize that he was being manipulated through mind control practices. He thought everything was about his own free will, and that anybody from family or outside the cult group that was telling them, hey, something's wrong here, they were just actually being manipulated by Satan. So he talks about the bite model, which is what? Behavioral control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And there are various videos on the internet about that. And I may not be the greatest expert on that, and Lizzy may not be the greatest expert, but she's read Steve Hassan stuff, and actually she sounded pretty articulate to me. So first of all, hats off to Lizzy. I really do like the hat. She was excited about her hat in this particular video, and it is a pretty cool hat. So what are we going to learn? Behavioral control. How do they do it in the JWs? Okay, because they're part of society. They're not off with the Moonies, right? Well, what does she say that they did there? Well, they've got they got dress codes. I don't know if she's even be able to wear that cool hat. I'm sure she could not wear it in Kingdom Hall during services. For some reason, at least I'm betting that they have behavioral control. You cannot dress a certain way. You got to have a skirt, or a dress to a certain length, and you can't wear pants or slacks or something to, church. There, Kingdom Hall, you got to have a certain dress code. You have a certain dress code all the time. You can't have tattoos. They probably got stuff with earrings, or maybe you can't dye your hair purple or green or blue. She said they were pretty specific about a lot of things. They have a code of health. So you can't drink this, you can't eat that. You know, kind of like the Word of Wisdom. It's a little bit different because they know they use the Bible and not the Book of Mormon or the Doctrine and Covenants. So, you know, they actually cite on JW.org. I was looking at that one time, and they'd say, you know, Timothy, and is it First Timothy? He actually tells us to stop drinking so much dang water and start drinking wine. Yeah, that's in the that's in the Bible. That's Paul talking. It says, stop drinking so much water and start drinking wine. So that's part of their deal is you can drink wine, but just don't get wasted. But I don't think they want you smoking and smoking and, you know, midnight token and all that kind of stuff. And she said that things were so high control in her parish, or whatever it was, you know, kind of like a parish, that actually a lot of the children were kind of getting into the rebellious situation, smoking, drinking, doing things, you know, unchaste, and actually worse off than a lot of the non-member children, which she hung out with generally. So she didn't get caught up too much in that kind of a thing, maybe not at all. Where actually some of the children from her parish, probably the wrong word, were getting caught up in that sort of a thing. So also, as far as behavior goes, they were compelled, basically, or heavily pressured to do what they called pioneering, which is missionary work. Everybody has to do a certain amount of it, I suppose, or they're heavily encouraged to, and you get to certain levels within the JW kingdom there, I suppose, the more hours of pioneering or missionary proselyting you do. The door-to-door thing, you know, or hang out at the shopping center, whatever. They're taking the Watchtower magazine or Awake, and they're talking to people about what's in there, or in basically trying to teach them their discussions, as we would say in Mormon terminology. Get appointments, and they say, hey, let's just go, we want to study the Bible with you. And what Lizzy said was, studying the Bible with them is what they say, but that's not what they mean. What they mean is, we want to study the Bible with you and convert you to being a JW, a tithe-paying JW, or whatever, you know, if it's tithing or some other form of donation. But these people are being they're being taxed for their time, their labor, their beliefs, and their money. So they're very strict codes that they need to go by. That she said that her life was very controlled as a Jehovah's Witness. Also, they have a lot of meetings, and the information that they received is controlled. As we get into information control, it kind of overlaps there. You know, they've got the Bible, but they got the JW interpretation of the Bible, which has some differences. And they have these Bible studies every week, and plus, you know, going to church. And in these Bible studies and in church lessons, Sunday school, Saturday school, I think they go to church on Saturday, you know, they're heavily correlated lessons. In other words, they don't just take the Bible and read, you know, from the beginning to the end of the chapter, maybe talk about it freely. What they do, it sounds like to me, is that they have lessons, you know, maybe they're theme-based lessons or something, and they'll throw some scriptures in that fit into the lesson, but you know, it'll be theme-based, and the teacher, you know, it's got the teacher's manual, and within the teacher's manual, they have certain questions they're supposed to ask the class. And then they also have the desired answer specifically in there, and so they need to encourage the people to give the correct answer. And sometimes, apparently, pressure seems to be applied to people to give, you know, the answer that they want. In other words, the discussion is being framed and regulated. So that's kind of a form of thought control. Actually, you know, heard that from other JWs and watched and read some of their things. So that's a little bit of that. And they got all these meetings. So they're constantly bombarded with Jehovah's Witness indoctrination, the thoughts, the language. You know, they got their own lingo, and you know, they're in the truth. You know, in Mormonism, you have the restored gospel. In JWs means the same thing. They are the one true church. Their leaders commune with Jehovah God, and no one can question them. When the, you know, elders have spoken, the discussion is over. Kind of like when the prophet has spoken, the discussion is over in Mormonism. So kind of the same thing. I saw another guy, and basically, you know, they said this is called a Messiah complex. You've got the leader or leaders. They have basically kind of a monopoly on speaking with God. I mean, everybody says they can speak to God, they can pray, this sort of thing, but it has to come in line with the brethren. In other words, like Hiram Page had a seer's stone and said he was getting revelations for the whole church, and Joseph Smith came up with a revelation that said, no, you can't get revelations for the whole church on your seer's stone. Maybe you can get revelation as long as it's in line with what I'm saying, basically, and, you know, that's about it. So it has to fall in line. There's a centralized governing organization of revelation, and it is wrong to criticize the leaders, even if the criticism is true. That's the way it is with the Jehovah's Witnesses, although I'm quoting Dallin Oaks there. So that's kind of called the Messiah complex. They are the brokers for God. You can't mess with the elders. So information. Now, what about thought control? Well, that's heavily regulated by the information you're receiving, especially if you got your own lingo that deals with, JWness and emotional control. Well, why do people join this church, and why do they stay? So, in other words, we're going to talk like Tony Robbins. Where's the carrot and where's the stick? Well, it's all about, salvation, happiness, being with loved ones, that sort of a thing, I guess. So, fear of death and a lack of resurrection. In JW theology, you don't get resurrected if you're not going to heaven, basically. If you're not saved, you're not getting resurrected. You're just dead and you're done. And that's no good. So the hope to live forever is the carrot, and you can stay with your family, hopefully. I mean, I have issues with their theology, because if one of you is one of the chosen 144,000, the other family members might be, part of the people saved on earth, then maybe you'd be split up. Talked to somebody that she said her mom was part of the 144, but she was saved on earth. She was in the waiting line for the other gig. So they were separated in eternity, which kind of wasn't as good as Mormon theology. And anyway, she wasn't too eager to continue the discussion, because her theology kind of was messed up there. But most people now, they can't even get on the waiting list for the 144,000 super saved in heaven, so they're trying to be saved on earth, and they ought to be able to hang out together. But you see, if you disobey the brethren, if you stop doing your pioneering hours, you give the wrong answers in Sunday school, you're caught smoking or drinking or well, other than wine or whatever, if you break the rules, they have their judicial courts, kind of like the courts of love in the church, and you can be disfellowshipped or excommunicated or something of that nature. I may not have my JW lingo all down. I think they're bigger on the disfellowshipment word, but I think it's closer to being exed. It's pretty harsh. And so they keep people in line, because you see, if you're kicked out, no one even is supposed to speak to you. It's really harsh. They are really ostracized. In fact, ostracized family. You're done with JWness. We don't even talk to you. You are no longer ours. You have been disfellowshipped from family. You have been disowned, and that's heavy. So people come to the realization, hey, there's something wrong with this, religion. I don't believe the doctrine. These guys at the top are corrupt. This can't be, the one true church I've been told all my life. Well, if they come out with that, they may lose. They may never speak to their family members again. They may be done. Get out of here. You're disowned. Kind of like this argument I saw. Somebody was saying, we don't believe that Lucifer and Satan are brothers. Lucifer and Jesus are brothers. This was actually a Mormon saying this. They said, look at this. Here's proof. And I looked it up to see what their thing was, and somebody's argument was, yeah, sure, Lucifer and Jesus were brothers in the premortal existence, but God disowned Lucifer, so they're no longer related. Therefore, Mormons don't believe that anymore, according to this person and their defense of that against some Christians. I can't say I'd agree with it, but that's effectively what happens to these JWs. Now, that's a little harsher than it happens usually in Mormonism, isn't it? But if we really look, how is it if people are excommunicated, or if they apostatize, if they decide, I don't believe this is true. I don't believe that God commanded Joseph Smith to, basically break his marriage covenants of monogamy, to cleave unto her only and to forsake all other women. I don't believe that God would tell Joseph Smith to do that. He had a sacred covenant. Section 132 says those are, covenants are good, as long as you're still alive. Why would God tell him to break the terms upon which his wife agreed to that legal contract? That's breach of contract. That's adultery. Even if God tells you to do it, it's still adultery. So people say, I don't believe this. And okay, well, what happens to them? They're apostates. They're excommunicated if they say, I do not believe, I go against the brethren. I don't believe this. I don't believe that. I believe women should have the priesthood. I don't believe that, various things. And they get excommunicated for these things. People that said, hey, Joseph Smith was doing the wrong thing when he was with all these other girls and taking other men's wives and stuff, and people have been excommunicated for speaking out. Same thing happens with Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, if they're excommunicated, and I've been there when people, it was announced in priesthood, so-and-so's been excommunicated for apostasy or for adultery. If it's adultery, they'll say, say hello to him in the streets or something. If it's apostasy, it's a different situation. And I was listening to some JW conference thing, and it was actually a little clip, and I think it was Chris Johnson had it on his thing when he was talking about JWs and mind control and how it affected him, seeing how this was done. And they were saying things like, apostates are mentally diseased. They serve Satan and seek to ensnare you in his lies, taking you away from Jehovah, God's true church. And it sounded a little more culty than what we might hear in general conference, but I've heard some pretty similar things. Apostates. So in the Temple Recommended Review, what are we told? Do you associate or affiliate, with anybody who doesn't support or whose views are not in harmony with those of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? So does that, it doesn't say, except for family, or except for the people that you work with, or so the people you hire, or whatever. It just says, do you, associate with, or sympathize with, or anything like that. I don't want to misquote it, but I have had a number of those interviews, and I believe we can probably find exactly the words online. And so, yeah, we are told that they are, bad news. People that don't any longer believe are bad news. So people have been ostracized. Boys that don't go on missions can be ostracized. Read about somebody that they left their child out in the southern Utah desert or something when he said he wasn't going on a mission. How many girls have been told or counseled, hey, don't, tell these boys that I'm not going to marry you until you come back from a mission. So don't even think about it. This is kind of a bit of behavioral control manipulation that's gone on. Did the girls at BYU look for the line in the pants for the garments, underneath? Is this a worthy priesthood boy? Everything is tied to the temple in Mormonism. So what is tied to the temple? Well, we were talking about the word of wisdom yesterday, even though some of the aspects of it really didn't make sense. Well, you can't drink coffee, but I guess you could have gotten a temple recommend if you're drinking decaf or postum, right? So obviously it's caffeine, isn't it? Then how come you can drink hot chocolate? Then how come you can't drink tea? Well, because it's got caffeine. Herbal tea is okay, so it's caffeine, right? Then how come you can drink Coke now? It's full of caffeine. It's got a lot more than green tea, and it's bad for you, and green tea is good for you, but tea is tea, and you can't go to the temple if you're drinking tea or coffee, right? Weird. That's part of that behavioral control thing. How much sense does that stuff make? You can drink bad stuff, but you can't drink good stuff? It never said anything about caffeine or you never said coffee or tea. You just said hot drinks. So you drink hot cocoa, at the youth conference or the father and sons or whatever, or the ward dinner. Hot cocoa. It's hot. And it wasn't given as a commandment. It said it was given for the least of anybody who could ever even be called a saint. But Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, all the boys, they didn't obey it. They drank. They drank sometimes a lot. How is this divine guidance? I don't know. There were a lot of really weird questions that you can come up with. The harder you look at the word of wisdom, it says don't eat meat, don't kill animals. Genesis said don't kill animals. And then they're killing animals like crazy for sacrifices. The blood of all these animals will be required at your hand, only to save your lives, animals. And the church gets heavily involved in the meat business, and that's not part of the temple recommend. No one even cares. They serve meat at almost every ward dinner. So we saw some of the really strange discrepancies there, and how it seems to correlate to businesses that the church is involved with sometimes. Weird, lots of sugar consumption, sugar business, owned by the church. Meat is businesses owned by the church. But you can't drink coffee or tea, not even green tea, I guess. I don't know, but you can drink Coke. Did they invest in Coke? I heard that, but that's probably some born-again Christian lie, Right? Who knows what the church invests in? They're not very financially transparent. When they had the financial report in General Conference, it came up, and what did they say? Did they give us any numbers about anything? No, it didn't. It was really weird. They said, okay, well, it's been audited. The church's his budget's been audited, and they did what every good Mormon should do, stay within a budget. So that's our report. Thank you. I'm like, what? You got to be kidding me, right? So the temple. You go to the temple. Why? Well, it's key to everything, because in Mormonism, the carrot and the stick is happily families forever. Families can be together forever through Heavenly Father's plan. I always want to be with my own family, and the Lord has shown me how I can. And how is that? Summarized: pay, pray, and obey. Follow the brethren, do what they say. Don't question anything. Go on your mission. Pay 10% of your gross income. Don't drink coffee or tea. Don't break the law of chastity. Try not to make this rhyme too much here. I'm not into rap or anything, or poetry, Conform and follow. Do what you're told. Do we have lots of meetings? Yeah, you even have your family home evening. It's supposed to have a church-based lesson in it. Seminary indoctrinates children 5 days a week during the school year, but they don't even focus on the plan of salvation. You get a brief presentation according to Boyd K. Packer's advice in the teacher's manual there, which I was reading and did a video on. Brief presentation on the plan of salvation. And by the way, they cut out various parts of it. Like they cut out the 3 kingdoms of glory. It was just the celestial. They cut out, spirit prison or hell and everything that's going on. They super abbreviated. Then Boyd just says, give a brief presentation and then just kind of reinforce it as the year goes. That should be like the major focus, is understanding the plan of salvation. But it's not. Instead, you're taught about all this other, whatever, church history or something, and is it correct? They don't seem to know a lot of things that really happened. The primary source documents indicate an entirely different history than what we're told in gospel doctrine or what they're told in church history in the seminary classes. Although I did notice that they had the teachers telling them now that Joseph Smith actually did have like 9 versions of the first vision, but they needed to be aware he just was emphasizing different things to different audiences. And then they gave kind of basically a false example, and saying that Paul did the same thing with the story on the road to Damascus. Actually, what he did is contradict himself completely. It's a completely false example. In fact, that was one of the examples we were supposed to give as missionaries to teach that the Bible is not defendable and it's full of errors because the Catholic Church screwed it up. So that was used differently here to justify Joseph Smith basically contradicting himself. They didn't go into detail on what they were, because if you look at it, it's not just emphasizing. He's got his age different times. He's there for a different reason. Different people appear to him. I mean, they are not the same thing. And of course, if you look at the historicity of it, even his own family, nobody was going into these things in 1819 or 1820, these revivals. They started that in 1823. So anyway, watch the First Vision documentary that I did. I've done a couple of them. So, and they got in the history, they got in the teacher's manuals things saying, actually, this was a lesson manual for church, said, if people challenge the historicity, tell them that church, scholars noticed that there were some discrepancies and they've been doing a study on it. They don't tell any of the results. Just like they say these 4 different versions, you can look it up in a 1985 Ensign article. That's what the seminary teacher was supposed to tell these children. It's in a 1985 Ensign article that you could explore it on. They don't say, hey, it's on LDS.org in the Gospel Topics essays, where they try to go on with this theme that says Joseph was just emphasizing different aspects of what was obviously the same vision, even though different people were in it. He's a different age every time, and he's there for a different reason, and different things happened. Yeah, so they do everything they can to make it sound like he was just describing something a little bit differently and emphasizing things. But if you read the visions, you got to be either completely brain dead or at least down to double digits in the IQ. It's ridiculous. So they put these children on a wild goose chase. They tell them it's in the 1985 Ensign article. What are they supposed to do? Crawl into the attic and look for it? They've got a current essay on it on LDS.org, but it happens to be with other essays. They're also trying to do damage control on other aspects of Mormonism that show that, well, it's difficult or impossible to reconcile these aspects, these doctrines, these histories, to the concept or the assertion that an all-knowing, unchanging, and perfect God is guiding the LDS church. Things like Joseph Smith cheating on his wife with all these other women, taking other dudes' wives, and then all these little girls being his wives, so-called wives. There was no authority to do it. The whole Section 132 wasn't, ever even given to the church during his lifetime, but they've retroactively sealed him to all these girls, including 11 dudes' wives that he was with. Even like apostles' wives, or at least Orson Hyde's. Some of the other apostles' wives turned him down. I mean, stuff like that they don't want these children to see. The Book of Abraham, a document, a funerary text from an Egyptian funerary text from about the time of Christ, having zero and zilch to do with Abraham. So that the churches said, hey, he just was getting inspired looking at this completely unrelated Egyptian crap that cost him $2,400 of other people's money and would have been enough money to buy maybe a couple hundred acres of land in Kirtland when they had all kinds of land speculation going on. He just used that to get inspired about something completely unrelated to it. God gave him this revelation. That's not what Joseph Smith said. He said, this was written by the hand of Abraham on this papyrus, and I translated it by the gift and power of God. Unfortunately, he also translated the facsimiles, which were also dated to about the time of Christ, and that they have, and had nothing to do with anything that he said they did. And he also got some Egyptian characters and translated them for an Egyptian alphabet, which was also completely 100% false. Kinds of Egyptologists have looked at that and said things that don't sound very complimentary of Joseph Smith. So we don't want to get too deep into that. LDS.org basically doesn't really give us a fair and balanced essay on anything. They seem to be leading us to conclusions, and the conclusion they always lead us to is, we really can't figure this out, so you'll just have to pray about it. And if you are worthy, the Spirit will manifest the truth of the gospel unto you. And if you don't get that, obviously, it implies you must not be worthy. Kind of like what Dallin says and what they put in the seminary teacher's manual to tell the children that we don't depend on any historical facts for our testimonies. People who are worthy Latter-day Saints recognize that it is the Holy Spirit that gives us our testimony of the truth of the gospel, the restored gospel. So seriously, folks, the carrot is your family together forever. And to do that, you've got to be temple worthy. So you've got to obey the word of wisdom. You got to pay 10% of your gross income. You got to follow all these other commandments, do what you're told, or no temple blessings, no family forever. And if you realize that something isn't right, or you feel that and speak out, disfellowshipped or exed, or you don't even serve a mission, girls are going to look at you if you're a guy and go, loser! You ever watch the, what was it, that Eddie Murphy movie, or him and that other guy? Some random white guy, whatever, you know, that, where they do that daycare thing. Yeah, daddy daycare, that's what it is. And so this other guy from their company that they were all execs with, or sales and marketing dudes with, you know, and they got laid off. So Eddie Murphy and the other guy formed this daycare thing. And so the other guy looks at him, you know, he comes up, they meet somewhere in the park or whatever, and he does this picture frame thing, you know, and goes, losers! And that's what the Mormon girls are taught, basically, or conditioned to do, or everybody, but especially, you know, your peer group, the, you know, potential girlfriends or marriage partners for eternity look at you and go, loser! You know, if you're not serving the Lord on a mission. If you're growing up in an LDS community, how difficult is that? You know, if people are thinking, oh, you know, I live, you know, in some place where it's hard, you know, not that many Mormons, but if you live and that's your whole community, what if you're living in, like, you know, whatever, Payson, Utah, or Nephi, or Ephraim, or Heber City? Everybody's looking at you like, loser! I mean, the consequences of leaving are huge. They're told to be huge in eternity, and they're made huge for non-compliance, you know, in the here and now. And that's what one thing that Lizzy talked about with the JWs. She said, hey, you know, if you can't make a graceful exit, something ain't right. And she talked about her mom leaving a Baptist church to turn into a witness, a JW. And she said, you know, the JWs, they're more culty than Mormonism in many aspects that are discernible. So they made her, like, write a letter and deliver it or something. Maybe she chose to hand deliver it to her pastor. She's maybe just a, you know, upfront, authentic kind of person. And it's had to say, you know what, I'm done with you and your Baptist, false, phony Church of the Devil. All churches are churches of the devil, basically, except for the Watchtower, right? Just like, you know, 1 Nephi chapter 14 says. Book of Mormon, there's saved two churches only, the Church of God and the Church of the Devil. And everybody else is just an appendage to that whore of Babylon that we talked about in chapter 13. And you can see the apostles and so forth really elaborate on that or rail on that in journal discourses. People like Orson Pratt and Heber Kimball, probably, maybe Brigham Young, Jetty Grant, George A. Smith, who knows. Yeah, I've read some of that stuff. So that's the same kind of thing they get there. So she goes and tells the Baptist minister, hey, I'm out of here. And what Lizzy says is that her mom, you know, was able to say this to the minister, and he said, hey, well, you know what, the door's open. Anytime you want to come back, it's cool. You know, we're friends. I see you on the street. It's all good. But she said, it's not that way once you've joined the Watchtower. Once they've got a hold of your family, once they've got their claws into you, it's different. There's no graceful exit. There's no graceful exit in Mormonism if you come out either and say, you know what? I don't believe God commanded Joseph Smith to take Orson Pratt's wife, who fortunately refused him, Orson Hyde's wife, who didn't refuse him, William Law's wife, who did refuse him, Sidney Rigdon's daughter, who did refuse him, Heber Kimball's daughter, who was coerced by Joseph Smith and her father, possibly, after Heber's wife got off the hook. Angel with a flaming sword, was that involved? I don't know about that with her. That was some other girl. With her was the main thing. Your entire family will be exalted for generations to come. Guaranteed glory in the celestial kingdom if you'll just marry me, girl. So what if she was 14? Right? Well, they talk about that a lot on the internet, Helen Mark Kimball. So Joseph had a thing for young girls. But did Heavenly Father or Jesus Christ command him to do that when he was already entered into a valid marriage contract, a sacred covenant, a legally binding contract? He was legally and lawfully married to Emma Hale, monogamously. Terms of the contract, no other girls. So people don't believe that. Some people don't. Some people, they're like, well, you know, whatever God wants, it's cool, man. He's not into keeping contracts. Obeying, honoring, and sustaining the law of the land. Unless, of course, you know, there are certain circumstances. Well, you let go the iron rod, the word of God. You decide that the brethren weren't always honest about everything. You decide that the book of Abraham stuff represented fraud. You decide that the Nephites probably didn't have steel factories or drive chariots, and the Jaredites didn't have elephants or successfully bring over honeybees that all disappeared, that they, you know, didn't have horses and didn't grow wheat, and, you know, all of those things that are in the Book of Mormon that don't actually, you know, it didn't exist in pre-Columbian America. Your history, baby. So, we can learn a lot from our ExJW friend, Lizzy B. We can learn a lot from who she's learned a lot from. We can learn a lot from a lot of people that have awakened to the fact that there is group mind control practice in the LDS Church, and that the temple really binds us in. The temple covenants, which we go beyond and enter into Freemasonic style secret combinations in these death oaths, although we don't see the penalties anymore in the church after 1990, about April. Joseph Smith brought an element of a secret society, secretive society with its secrets, into Mormonism. In May 4th of 1842, after he had joined Freemasonry about 7 weeks earlier and received the same signs, tokens, and penalties that he used, with slight alterations, from Freemasonry into Mormonism, bringing in a secret combination which he authored in the Book of Mormon and in the Book of Moses as being of the devil. But he brought the same style thing in to the temple. Never mind the Danites, who were basically doing the same thing, but on a higher level or a lower level, an more evil level, as far as, you know, being sworn to do whatever the prophet said. Murder and treason not accepted. People like Bill Hickman and Porter Rockwell are pretty noted for being hitmen with many murders under their belt, according to some. Do your own research on that. So bringing Freemasonry into the temple waved goodbye to people of Lizzy's race because, in my opinion, it would have been a big problem since Freemasonry is completely segregated, or for sure was at that point. The black people belonged to the Prince Hall Rite of Freemasonry. The white people were involved with, like, you know, the York Rite and the Scottish Rite. Guys from the York Rite formed the Nauvoo Lodge. Not going to have black people doing that. Not going to have any white people in the Black Prince Hall thing either. You know, they're segregated too. Let's be fair. But you can't have these folks hanging out together doing Masonic stuff, I guess. So I think that probably had a whole lot more to do with what occurred with the segregation in the temple and the whole priesthood thing being written up in the Book of Abraham the exact same time Joseph became a Freemason. But he brought in something that bound the people into the organization with the temple ordinances, and especially with the signs, tokens, and penalties. The whole thing binds us in a very cult-like fashion. We find mind control used in the media heavily. People are ostracized for not believing the groupthink. It's done in education, as we call it, or indoctrination. It's done in the media. It's done in society at large. And what we find is there are certain people that seem to be at the top of religion, of various industries like banking, all sorts of huge companies, CEOs, and of government. We find people involved with secretive societies. We find people, many of them involved with what seems to be the meeting ground for many of these secretive or secret societies, Freemasonry. High-level Freemasonry. I'm not talking about, you know, your average Joe. No pun intended. Mormon Truth out. Like and subscribe.